So the rhetoric around Greenland has not stopped. There is still a lot of discussion coming from the Trump administration about annexing Greenland, and NATO has backed them up, said, we're going to send troops over there. But I don't think everything went the way that the NATO top brass thought it was going to go. How many troops did they end up sending over there, Lucas? It was some shockingly small amount.
Well, I think they those I who knows? They claim that the troops were already had a planned um a planned trip to Greenland. I don't think that they have in reality, I don't think that they have any troops to spare. Um
Well, I mean, I was just kind of looking at this article where it was like what 15, 16 people that got sent over there. I mean, long enough for them to and they stayed long enough for a photo op and then went home. It was too cold.
well, either way, like whether or not these were sent over as a message of European strength and their claim and a threat to America, uh, that's pretty weak. But it also is indicative of the actual numbers and the amount of soldiers that they could send over to Greenland. So it exposes their hand. I thought it was pretty funny, um, in the wake of this political tussle over Greenland, that those soldiers would wind up and that they turn around so quickly to go home. They did turn around after Trump threatened raising the tariff on Europe. So I don't know if that was coincidental. I don't know if they saw some bad weather coming and some cold days ahead of them. I don't know what was going on there, but what I do know is that um, Europe does not have the soldiers, does not have the the weapons, does not have the will to hold on to Greenland.
Well,
And
so that's really now a question of what does NATO mean if a NATO nation like the United States threatens another NATO nation, Denmark, to take away their territory, Greenland, which has a abysmally low population, by the way. I never even really thought to look because I always just assumed that the area we were fighting over was large and populous, but it's not that large and it's not that populous. It's 50,000 people on this island.
56, almost.
Yeah, don't mind me and my rounding down. I
Yeah.
don't mean to reduce the
Uh,
population by
that's
10%.
that's a difference. That could be 2,200 troops there. Um, what indeed is NATO? I think that's a great question to ask. I think NATO has been defined by their enemy, and their enemy has been Russia. And as the United States um, warms its relationship with Russia, Europe either needs to or begins to understand that if their reason for banding together remains this common enemy, and that enemy is going to be Russia, that they're going to go it alone. And so I've wondered as the war turned sour in Ukraine, what the future of NATO would be. I've wondered since I was in junior high and the Soviet Union collapsed, whether NATO would continue to why NATO continued to be an organization. And so especially as as Russia has dug its heels in or committed to not giving up more territory to NATO and have played a rather masterful hand in Ukraine in drawing down NATO and also pitting the various factions in NATO against each other. Um, what is the future of NATO? And I think Europe needs to. I think Europe is also grappling with this and beginning to say or to think of themselves in terms apart from defining themselves as fighting against a common enemy. And I hope
Well,
that's
I mean, a common enemy is the great uniter. The thing that really strikes me about NATO at this point is this is a test. This is a test of NATO not just in spirit, because in the Ukraine, it was a territory that was kind of a NATO protectorate. It wasn't part of NATO. They hadn't been allowed in. I believe Russia said absolutely not. We do not allow for this encroachment, this expansion of NATO. And not only that, but like Ukraine will never be let in. The entire war that has been going on over there was somewhat predicated on the expansion of NATO and Russia's unhappiness with it. Article 5 spells out pretty clearly what is supposed to happen here. If there's an attack on any member nation, that they shall assist. This isn't a may assist. Like it seems to me that this is a pretty prescriptive kind of a thing. So in my mind, this is a test of NATO. If a member nation of NATO goes and does the thing that NATO was founded and chartered to rally around, that if something like this occurs, because this would be not dissimilar to the US invading Poland or something of that ilk. It's a member nation, and Article 5 ought to trip. And if it doesn't, then not only is it dead in spirit, but now it is functionally dead, because the thing that it was intended to do isn't even happening.
Well, this is not an invasion of Greenland. And the nuance here is going to be very important.
Annexing,
The
dismantling,
annexation
destruction, complete annihilation of them
is
as an
not
entity.
invasion. That's the tagline. That'll be what Trump states, and Europe happily falls in behind. And we're already seeing Europe change their tune with regards to Trump's Trump ratcheting up his claims, or American claims on Greenland. So yes, Article 5. Yes, Article 5. I, I think this a discussion about Article 5 is moot, because NATO's already in trouble. I mean, let's go back to Trump in his first term trying to withdraw the United States from NATO, and then coming back to the table and saying, well, raise the amount of money that you're contributing to NATO to. Well, in his first term, it was pay what you already promised and that you haven't paid up in years, and then in his second term, it was I want 5% of your GDP. And then remember also there was the trade deal that he cut with Europe following that Oval Office meeting with Zelensky earlier this year, at a point when it became apparent to everybody that that the NATO forces were going to lose their proxy battle in Ukraine. So the writing has been on the wall with regards to NATO for quite some time. Now we've had some confounding attacks that have persisted despite Trump, despite Trump's Russian the meeting that he held with Russia in Alaska, and I'm thinking about the recent attack on Vladimir Putin's residence, where they also had a nuclear control center, or nuclear arms control center. That all is a little bit confusing to me, but what's not confusing to me is Trump's long goals to withdraw the United States from NATO, to withdraw American troops from bases around the world. By the way, we just pulled out of a base in Iraq. That seems according to Trump's goals. I also saw that Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan announced a trilateral defense agreement, much like NATO, between those three countries. And we should also be thinking about how broad was the defense agreement of NATO. And by that I mean, did it Russia or the Soviet Union is never specified. The language of NATO is with regards to some strange whomever may attack Europe, but in reality, it's against Russia. And and so when
Well,
you
I
had
could have imagined in a different world that China could have easily threatened Europe if it had wanted to, if it had ever been militaristic and expansionist, had it wanted to put its might towards moving westward. I mean, it's not outside the bounds of some concept when you're thinking about what might happen in the future. There's some great power that rises up.
maybe and maybe, but I don't know if that was a possible future. We've turned from that direction in the future for some
But when
time.
NATO was founded, I mean, this was a different time. I mean, you had England, France, Germany, they were all massing troops. I mean, this was a time before, the 70 years of military silence that Europe was allowed to build their social programs and didn't have to put any money into the military because the US was printing dollars and everyone accepted that because they were going to be the world's policemen, and all these great social programs that the Europeans wanted were able to be funded because they didn't have to spend any money on their military because they were printing dollars and policing the world for them. Now, if that comes to a halt, those programs are going to have to see a different funding model if Europe's going to mass armies again.
Well, and it's I agree, and to that I say, what are the leaders of Europe saying now? And it was interesting to me that all of a sudden, we see Friedrich Merz, Chancellor of Germany, lamenting that Germany got rid of its nuclear power plants, and lamenting the lack of Russian gas, of their Nord Stream pipelines. And I have not heard um, any change of tune from Emmanuel Macron or Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron of France or Keir Starmer of Great Britain, but Germany beginning to say, "Wait a second, what are we going to do for energy?" To me, is a signal of a strong pivot that Merz is planning, in which they will say, um, well, there's two alternative futures. There's sort of this nationalist, we need to build up our army to fight Russia at some point in the future. I don't think that's realistic, and I think that they understand that that's not realistic. They need weapons like the Oreshnik, and apart from the Oreshnik, Russia's Poseidon is a great threat to them also. So uh, I think that especially Friedrich Merz is beginning to understand that they need to get back to producing things, if they are to be successful in the long run. And if that is also forfeiting Greenland, they're going to be happy to do so. I think we've already seen that. Um,
Because we're still taught, and as far as the weapon systems you just mentioned, so we're still firmly on the future of modern warfare is hypersonic missiles. I mean, to me, those really are the most important military advancement in modern times because they replace so many things. It's almost like the smartphone replacing your Walkman, your boombox, your iPod, all these gadgets you used to have have all been collapsing into just this one thing because it's so powerful and it can do so many things. That to me is kind of like what the hypersonic missiles are. It's like why do you need to have a tank? Why do you need to have a fighter plane when you can fire a supersonic missile that delivers the payload exactly where you want it and destroys whatever it is that you need destroyed, and you do so without using a nuclear weapon. You deliver whatever high explosive payload you want, and you can target and destroy stuff, and it's unstoppable by any modern means. Like there is no missile defense system that can possibly thwart that.
well, and I think there's also the aspect of surgical strike, and a surgical strike that is targeted at the leaders of other nations. And if we think about some of the characteristics of nuclear strikes, everyone suffered, and maybe the entire world suffers. But then with these new hypersonic missiles, um, there is little defense against them, and there's a precision to their targeting that makes it. I mean, go back.
Minimization of suffering. It's maximizing damage and effectiveness and minimizing suffering of the population. So you turn over the regime, you turn over the people that are in control, and then you're left standing. So it starts to become this very surgical type of warfare.
Absolutely, and think about how vulnerable Europe is in that regard because they have used propaganda, censorship, and I don't know, technocratic autonomy in order to continue their policies against a growing mass of will against their policies from inside their countries. And that's going to be very dangerous for countries in the future. I mean, also look at the most recent wars, that mini wars, we'll call them what they are, that have occurred around the world. Trump abducted the leader of Venezuela. The United States and Israel just tried to stage a coup in Iran by by doling at well. One back in June, they tried a decapitation, an unsuccessful, but a decapitation strike against the heads of the military and the heads of the political leadership. They failed to get some of the top leaders. Maybe they would have exceeded, but succeeded if they had done so. But we begin to understand that there was this deeper operation to 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 build up the resistance amongst the population that probably had been originally planned to follow in the wake of that decapitation strike. So, how vulnerable is Europe when it comes to that? Because have a lot of communication. There's a lot of national identities that exist within Europe. Um, uh, if Russia decides to play their game against them, I think that they are incredibly vulnerable. So they need to back away from their little war table and their little war map and get back to building things, get back to industrial relations and commercial relations with other countries around the world.
So you said that Germany has been lamenting the fact that they shut down their nuclear reactors. Like, is it possible? Have you heard anything about whether they can fire those back up, or were they hobbled in a sufficient way that they're difficult to bring back online? I'm kind of curious about that.
I think that they raised their nuclear reactors, so I don't think that they can come back online. Um, but we are seeing progress in modular salt reactors. We talked about thorium. I think they do have some potential there. They also have a real easy solution, not an easy solution, but you would think that their ideal solution would be to figure out how to get along with Russia and turn the gas back on. Um, I would think that would be the quickest solution for Germany to get back to production. Um, but haven't seen any sign of that occurring as of yet, any public sign of that occurring.
Well, I found a little something on it. And it does sound like they destroyed it. So yeah, if they're taking out the cooling towers, there's no coming back from this decision. So if they're lamenting the fact that they've done it, um, yeah, there's not much they can do to turn it around when they just dropped the cooling towers. They'd have to build those again. I imagine that's possible, but the further they've gone down this road, the less likely it is that they can bring any of that back.
Yeah, but with the new smaller reactors, I don't know how much uh, I don't know how massive the nuclear um, infrastructure is going to have to be. So um, I we'll see what they do with regards to nuclear. France still has
You know,
their.
because I imagine because you're talking about what bringing on the thorium reactors or like more modern stuff that carries less risk than what the nuclear power plants of old had. I suppose that's another point to think about is if you build these very vulnerable nuclear power plants in the world of hypersonic missiles. That's a juicy target to take out with a hypersonic missile and cause some problems.
Absolutely, and I think that was part of Germany's original calculation, and not that they're they took out their nuclear power plants after Fukushima, in Japan and the nuclear disaster there. But I think that, that the thorium reactors change a lot of calculations due to their size. Um, they don't melt down. You think about the population density of Germany too. I don't know that it was such a very bad decision, because also, if they were planning um, a war with Russia, whether it be a proxy war or not, um, and they had some sort of inkling of Russia's development of these precision hypersonic missiles, you could say, why, oh, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea for them to take them down, especially whenever they had an alternative reason like the Fukushima disaster. But thorium salt reactors, they don't melt down if they're hit. And the other very interesting change in the world is, one, France still has their uranium reactors, but they've lost their supplies of uranium as they've been forced out of their colonies in France. So they don't
Well,
have.
those are two interesting points there. It's like if Europe wants to build reactors, do they have the raw materials? Do they have access to the nuclear materials that allow for the reaction and the energy harvest to occur? I suppose the second other thing to consider in the world of hypersonic missiles and NATO is, can you build things in a place where they are not vulnerable to being hit? I imagine that means you have to build things under mountains, because that's pretty much the only defense for hypersonic missiles is you just have to have a sufficient amount of mass above it to ensure that that missile can't get down to whatever it is that you're trying to protect.
Well, you can. They certainly have mountains all over Europe. You can build them under mountains, but then you have to worry about contamination in your groundwater. And again, I think this is where thorium salt reactors are so interesting, because they don't require as much water for the cooling of the reactor as as the uranium reactors required. Anyway, I hope to see moves in that direction, not just in Europe, but in other places around the world. I think it will be interesting to see if China um, starts cutting deals with building those reactors that they have. I don't know if they've perfected them, but come quite a ways in building, in some of their Belt and Road countries, maybe like Pakistan and Iran, maybe in North Africa. Um, uh, but you know, if they begin to industrialize the production of those reactors, um, Europe, especially Germany, um, maybe Britain, could really could benefit from from switching their reliance on power over to those reactors. Um,
So going back to Greenland here, which is what we started off talking about, and took a detour into NATO and European energy policy. When we have a population of 50,000 people on Greenland, in the US talking about annexing this territory, this autonomous territory, I think is how it's described in Wikipedia. So it's, I guess, somewhat similar to the disposition of Canada, which is also an autonomous territory, but this time of the UK. 50,000 people are not going to mount a defense against the United States, and they can put those signs up all they want. But if the United States decides that they want to take over, they'd really only have to put a small border around that small little population that actually exists, and the rest of the country would essentially be up for grabs. It's not like the population of Greenland is going to mount a defense against the United States. This is unlikely to be the case. So if the U.S. decides they really want to do this, I don't really see a path to stopping them from doing it.
the Greenland. one of the talking points in Greenland has been that they prefer Denmark to the United States because of the healthcare, the availability of healthcare from Denmark. Um, when we start to think about the amount of money that the United States can pay to 56,000 people, I don't. I think the United States would be very wise to consider some sort of payment package to those 56,000 people, and also some sort of something that looks like the Alaska tax with regards to what they they benefit from the exploration and the use of Greenland's either land for bases or resources for industrial production in the future. And I think once those offers get floated around Greenland, a lot of this, a lot of of their allegiance to Denmark will fade. So once Trump began to well, in the wake of the abduction of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, um, uh, so quickly in the wake for Trump to pivot to making a move on Greenland, I thought, wow, everyone's riled up about about the abduction of Maduro, and Trump is moving while there is confusion in the United States, in the international community, and he's making this move on Greenland. And that to me was a signal that he was very serious about it. So with the tariff, with the threat of tariffs to Europe, uh, I think we should also consider what the Russians are saying. I haven't heard Vladimir Putin address this, but Kirill Dmitriev and Dmitry Medvedev have both commented, uh, essentially supporting the American bid on Greenland. And so it, I already consider it essentially a fait accompli. I don't know how the United States could, after being daring enough uh, to press this issue, if they're serious, then they have a lot of cards to play to make it successful. Um, and so I've also been wondering, if the Trump administration, if Donald Trump, if America is making a move on Greenland, then why not Canada? And I think that's a real question of what that will look like.
Well, that I mean, that's also been floated and discussed, so I would not be surprised if Greenland gets annexed, becomes a territory like Puerto Rico. This discussion of states, if I ever see a state added to the union in our lifetime, you can consider me the most shocked person ever, because states confer far too many rights into the union and changes the political calculus of the Senate and the House. I mean, that's just fraught with all kinds of political difficulty. I think this is why when the Democrats controlled all three branches of government recently and the issue of Puerto Rico came up and whether it was going to be the 51st state, that it didn't go anywhere, even though it was a Democratic talking point that it's been discussed and wanted for forever, and they made no move to do it. You're definitely not going to see that under a Republican administration. So admitting either of these places as anything other than protectorate territories without the full conferment of rights as a state into the union, I that's how I would expect to see it play out. The other thing that came to my mind was just what kind of presence the United States already has in Greenland. So there's one base that's there as part of an agreement that the U.S. has with Denmark. I'd imagine that Denmark would say you got to pull your guys out of this base if they were really serious about having less warm relations with the United States, because why would they want to allow a military base there? Now, I don't think they could actually kick them out, but rescinding this agreement and saying you guys are here illegally seems like it would be a next legal step for Denmark.
You know, I think the United States has some abandoned bases. I think there's an interesting one that they built underneath the ice back in World War II. Um, uh, but yes, we have one base there that is currently active. But as you talk
And
about
and is
the
this our Space Force base? So this is the new branch of government, right? Because we just that was founded under Trump to begin with. We had the Space Warrior.
I mean, maybe Space Force is there. But the Space Force's control center is in Alabama. But remember, a whole different conversation. Trump moved it from Colorado to Alabama, um, and I think that had everything to do with uh, the the Democratic bent in Colorado versus the very strong Republican state of Alabama. But as we talk about American bases overseas, one, the United States just gave over one of their bases in Iraq back over to the Iraqis, and um, God only knows what that means with regards to the stability in Iraq and the future of the Kurdish people, and maybe our relationship with Turkey in the future. But um, Donald Trump has stated in the past that he does not that he does not believe the United States should have all these soldiers stationed around the world. So if Europe is also looking towards the future, and a future that's not defined by their great enemy as Russia, and thinking about how to reestablish themselves, maybe they should be putting a couple of American bases on the table for for the United States to give up in Europe. And I think the Trump administration, not the Pentagon, but I think many in the Trump administration and the MAGA movement would be happy about giving that up. I know JD Vance would. So maybe we might see also some of the American defense focus move from Europe over to Greenland in this existing Thule Air Base there, or into something else that's created somewhere else in Greenland.
Maybe a final thought on Greenland. This being a test of NATO, that's the one that really sticks in my mind as one of the most important points here, because we've talked about whether NATO exists in practice and Article 5. And when it comes down to it, the United States asserting control and taking control of Greenland to me feels like the final step in Donald Trump withdrawing from NATO. This was his stated goal. He said he didn't want to be a part of it. He said he wanted this to be funded by the Europeans. And this to me just signals that he is absolutely serious about pulling out of NATO, because he's violating the fundamental tenets of the agreement. So do you think that this will be that he officially pulls out, or that NATO kicks the United States out for doing this? Like, which way do you think it'll be? Do you think he'll say, "I'm out," or do you think they'll say, "You're out because of what you've done"?
I don't think that either of those things will happen. I think that they will phrase this in different political terms. They will call this Denmark happily giving up Greenland. They will the I the Nate to me, NATO is already vestigial, and even more so. You mentioned the United States pouring money into Europe through NATO, and the United States did pour money into Europe through NATO. That has become that has become a an unsustainable model of the United States exerting its influence around the world. And we've also begun to understand that the true might of the American military was to pour money into the pockets of foreign politicians and into the pockets of international corporations who were making weapons or involved somehow in the defense industry, quote unquote defense industry. So I think that is what's drawing to a close. We've seen these big moves in both the gold and the silver markets. We've seen a stronger relationship between the BRICS countries and alternatives to the dollar. So that is what's dying, and NATO is going to NATO is going to become even more of a country club than it already was, and um, and if the United States has its way in the future, then the power locus of Europe will switch from NATO to the European Union, um, and the 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 disputes between the various countries of the world will be settled commercially rather than by means of military. But if it's to be if we're to move into a world that's dominated by military strikes and force, then again, I don't know in an era of in an era of precision hypersonic missiles, instead of this threat of mutual destruction of nuclear weapons, uh, NATO doesn't work in this new world. National defenses work, and so I don't think that we're going to see I don't think we're going to see any headlines of NATO is over or NATO has been disbanded. I think that it will just recede into obscurity. Will be
Like
re-
any of the other treaties or things that are no longer relevant, nobody really talks about, and it's just functionally ignored. Yeah, it's a good thought. There won't be any big blow up. There won't be any big bluster. It'll just kind of quietly recede into the background as the world moves on. It kind of seems like that's what we're already headed towards. A good thought. I think a good summation for where we're at. We'll have to watch very carefully. Greenland is certainly still in the news, still actively being thought about by the top people in the U.S. Administration. So I wouldn't expect to see this go away anytime soon. And in fact, we could see something happen very shortly. And I guess with that, we'll see you next time on FOMO.